The sound of metal crashing jolted me out of my hammock like a gunshot. I ran to the backyard, bare feet slapping against the patio tile, only to find Barbara Simmons, president of the Oak Ridge HOA, standing in the middle of my yard, holding a crowbar like she was auditioning for a Prison Break movie. Chunks of my pool fence were scattered around her feet. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled, heart pounding. Barbara turned slowly, sunglasses perched on her nose like she was above the law. Her helmet of blonde curls didn't move an inch. "This fence violates HOA Code 3.4.7. It obstructs uniform backyard aesthetics. Consider this a courtesy enforcement removal." I blinked, stunned. "You broke into my yard and destroyed my property." "You've been warned," she said, waving a piece of paper like it was the Constitution. 3 notices mailed. You ignored them." I snatched the paper. It was a blurry black and white printout of some regulation and a photo of my fence. No signature. No HOA letterhead. Just a scribbled date. "My fence was approved 2 years ago," I said. "Permitted, HOA stamped, and signed by your old board." Barbara tilted her head and gave me the kind of look you give roadkill. "Well, the new board disagrees." I stared at the wreckage. That fence wasn't just for privacy, it kept my 6-year-old son, Noah, from falling into the deep end. Now it sat in twisted pieces, and this woman thought she was a hero. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. "You're calling the cops?" she asked, suddenly defensive. "Yup," I said, dialing. "You just trespassed, vandalized, and endangered a child. That's not a code violation, Barbara. That's a felony." She scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "I have the authority." The dispatcher picked up, and I stepped away from her. "Yeah, hi. I need to report a trespasser who just tore down my pool fence with a crowbar. I've got her on my property right now." Barbara's face went pale. 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. 2 officers stepped out. One walked over to me. The other approached Barbara, who was now sitting on my lounge chair like it belonged to her. "She's the HOA president," I told the officer, showing him pictures I'd taken of the wreckage, plus the permit approval I kept in my garage binder. "That fence was permitted. She broke in and tore it down." The officer nodded, taking notes. "You have security cameras?" "Yep. Front, side, and backyard. Full view of her walking in and smashing everything." The second officer came back after speaking with Barbara. "She says she was enforcing HOA rules." I handed over the permit copy. "She's not above the law." They asked me to email the footage. I did. 5 minutes later, Barbara was in handcuffs. Her jaw dropped like she couldn't believe this was happening. "You can't arrest me," she snapped. "This is HOA jurisdiction." The officer didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, this is criminal trespassing and property destruction. You're going downtown." As they escorted her to the cruiser, she yelled, "You'll regret this, Samuel Myers. The board will hear about this." I waved as the door closed behind her. "Oh, I'm counting on it." The morning after Barbara's arrest, I walked out to find a folded yellow notice zip-tied to my mailbox. It was from the HOA and signed, no letterhead stating that I owed $500 in emergency landscape rebalancing fees. This was their retaliation. I took the paper straight to my neighbor, Jordan. He was a retired city zoning inspector who spent most of his days restoring classic motorcycles and fixing everyone's problems when the HOA got too bold. He read the notice twice, rubbed his chin, and muttered, "They're improvising fines now. That's new. They think I'm going to back down," I said. Jordan sat back in his lawn chair and gave me a slow nod. "Then let's not give them any room to dance." We spent the next few hours going through my records. I had kept every HOA letter, permit approval, and email since I bought the place. Jordan cross-referenced the documents with the current municipal codes while I called the city's building department to confirm the fence's permit was still valid. It was. By mid-afternoon, we had enough paperwork to bury the board in red tape. But something still didn't sit right. The fence was one thing, but Barbara had taken a crowbar onto someone's property with zero legal authority. That wasn't just overreach, it was criminal negligence. I drove to the police station with a flash drive of the footage and a printed timeline. The officer who had responded the day before recognized me immediately. "Turns out Barbara has a history," he said, handing me a thin file. 2 prior reports from last year. One for entering a garage during a landscaping dispute. Another for threatening to tow a resident's car off their own driveway. Both were dropped. No one pushed it. "She's been escalating," I said. "She's not your average busybody," the officer replied. She's got a savior complex and thinks the HOA is a badge. I walked the file over to the city prosecutor's office across the hall. By the end of the day, Barbara was facing upgraded charges: trespassing, destruction of private property, and child endangerment. Turns out, tearing down a safety fence near a pool where a kid lives is a serious offense. That night, I installed a temporary mesh fence, ugly, but effective. I also added a new trail camera on the side hedge. I wasn't about to let the board sneak in under cover of darkness. By the following weekend, the HOA called an emergency meeting at the rec center. Normally, these things drew maybe a dozen people, and half of them were just there for the free coffee. This time, over 60 residents showed up. Word had gotten around. I sat in the front row with Jordan and my friend Carla, who had her own run-ins with Barbara last fall when she was fined for painting her door maroon instead of approved crimson. She brought a binder of her own. When the board shuffled in, they looked rattled. Barbara wasn't present. She was under house arrest pending arraignment, but her two closest allies, Rick and Darlene, tried to keep up appearances. Rick tapped the mic. "We're here to address community concerns following recent events. Let's maintain decorum." Carla raised her hand before he could continue. "Why haven't you issued a statement about Barbara's arrest?" she asked. Rick cleared his throat. "We can't comment on legal matters that are ongoing." A man in the back called out, "She destroyed someone's fence with a crowbar." "That's not a legal matter. That's a meltdown." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Darlene leaned into her mic. "We understand emotions are high, but let's be respectful." Barbara was acting. "No," I interrupted, standing. "She wasn't acting on behalf of anyone but herself. I have the permit, the security footage, and a police report. She committed multiple crimes and endangered my son." Rick tried to regain control. "This isn't a courtroom." "Not yet," I said, "but it will be. And if this board doesn't take immediate action to suspend her and initiate a vote to remove her permanently, I'll file a civil suit for damages. And I won't be the only one." Jordan stood beside me. "You've all overstepped for years. Arbitrary fines, unauthorized inspections, threatening letters. We let it slide because we thought it'd blow over. But now, you've crossed into criminal territory." More neighbors stood. Carla passed out copies of a petition calling for Barbara's removal and a full audit of the HOA's last 2 years of expenditures. Within minutes, half the room had signed. Rick looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. We'll need to consult legal counsel." "You do that," I said. "But while you're at it, maybe check your bylaws. Because with over 50% of homeowners signing this petition, we can call a special election without you." The room broke into applause. Darlene's face flushed red as she grabbed her purse and stormed out. 3 weeks later, Barbara pled no contest to the charges. She paid over $8,000 in restitution, spent 6 nights in county lockup, and was slapped with a civil injunction prohibiting her from holding any leadership position in any HOA in the state for 5 years. The board tried to keep quiet about it, but the judge's ruling was public record. Carla posted a link on the neighborhood forum, and by the end of the day, Barbara's name was radioactive. The special election was held in late April. The entire board was voted out. We replaced them with a slate of sane, level-headed residents. One was a retired firefighter, another a school teacher, and Jordan was elected treasurer unanimously. The first thing they did? Repealed every bogus fine issued without proper documentation for the past 2 years. Then they voted to install an independent ombudsman to oversee any future violations. My fence? Rebuilt stronger, taller, and with a motion sensor light that triggers a little chime every time someone walks near it. Not for protection anymore, just a reminder. Last week, Noah asked me why we didn't move after all the chaos. I looked around at the yard, the neighbors waving as they walked by, the grill warming up for Carla's birthday cookout. Because bullies don't get to win, I told him. Not when you stand up to them with the truth and a few good people by your side. 2 months had passed since the special election, and Oak Ridge had a different pulse now. The neighborhood felt lighter. No surveillance-style patrols, no cryptic warnings pinned to doors. People walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders. But I knew better than to think the storm was over. One afternoon, I got a call from Benji, the new HOA president. He was a no-nonsense type, a retired firefighter with a voice like gravel and a habit of carrying a pocket notebook everywhere. He didn't waste time. "Sam, you might want to come to the office," he said. "We found something. And it's bad." The HOA office was tucked behind the clubhouse, a cramped building that still smelled faintly of stale printer ink and mildew. I walked in and found Benji sitting at the desk with Jordan and a woman I hadn't met before. She introduced herself as Dana, a forensic accountant the new board had hired to comb through the last 3 years of HOA finances. Dana slid a manila folder across the desk. These are reimbursement requests signed off by the old board. Most were marked emergency maintenance or legal consulting fees. But there's no service record, no contractors, no invoices. I flipped through the pages. All of this went through? Benji tapped one sheet. This one here, 8004, Emergency Landscaping Compliance Review. No such department exists. Dana leaned forward. We traced the account it was deposited into. It's a personal checking account. Belongs to Rick Delaney. I looked up. The same Rick who tried to defend Barbara at the meeting? Benji nodded slowly. The same. And it gets worse. We found a different fund, a security improvement reserve, that was set up without membership approval. Over $30,000 moved through it in 18 months. No receipts. No record of how it was spent. Was that Barbara's doing? Her name's on the setup paperwork, Dana said. But the transfers were authorized by all 3 previous board members, including Darlene. My stomach turned. I had expected pettiness, even vindictiveness. But this was organized theft. Benji stood and walked to the filing cabinet. He pulled out a locked box and set it on the table. We found this in the back closet. Took the maintenance guy an hour to pry it open. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Most had checks, some cashed, some not. A few contained handwritten notes from residents disputing fines or asking for extensions. At the bottom was a flash drive. Dana plugged it into her laptop. A folder popped up labeled Board Business. Inside were spreadsheets, audio recordings, and a series of PDFs labeled Enforcement Protocols. She opened the first one. We read in silence. It was a memo from Barbara to Rick and Darlene outlining a strategy to curate neighborhood compliance by issuing deliberate fines to non-cooperative homeowners, especially those who had demonstrated resistance to HOA authority. These weren't rule violations, Dana said. They were targets. Benji's jaw clenched. They were robbing people under the guise of enforcement. I took a breath. We need to go to the district attorney. Dana didn't even blink. Already in motion. I sent a summary of the findings yesterday. They called this morning. They want to see everything. By the end of the week, investigators from the DA's office came to Oak Ridge. Unmarked cars rolled into the clubhouse parking lot early on a Thursday. A few agents interviewed Benji and Dana inside while others collected boxes of records and removed the old office computer. News traveled quicker than ever. By evening, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. But what no one expected happened the next morning. Rick's house was raided by the county's financial crimes unit. Neighbors stood in driveways in stunned silence as 2 officers walked him out in cuffs. Darlene followed a few hours later, both charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and falsifying public documents. Barbara, still on probation from the fence incident, was named a co-conspirator. She was arrested later that afternoon while attempting to leave the state. The fallout was seismic. At the next community meeting, Benji didn't use a microphone. He didn't have to. The room was packed wall to wall. We owe you all transparency, he began, holding up a document. This is the DA's preliminary report. The old board misappropriated over $74,000 from HOA funds, most of it from unlawful fines, unauthorized bank transfers, and pocketed fees. Gasps echoed through the room. I saw Carla in the back, arms crossed, nodding slowly. Benji continued. The county will be pressing full charges. But we're not waiting. Starting today, we're refunding every fine issued under those bogus compliance efforts as far back as records allow. We're working with the city to ensure this board operates under full transparency. No more unchecked power. A man raised his hand. What about residents who were forced to change their homes or pay for repairs? Dana stood beside Benji. We've started a claims program. If you were affected, you'll be reimbursed. We've already frozen the old board's HOA reimbursements and are working to recoup the stolen funds. A woman near the front asked, how did they get away with it for so long? Benji answered without hesitation. Because no one expected them to lie. They counted on silence. That ends now. After the meeting, I stepped outside for air. Carla joined me. Remember when all we wanted was to not get fined for planting the wrong flowers, she said. I laughed, but it came out tired. Feels like a lifetime ago. She looked up at the sky. You know what's wild? Barbara always talked like she was protecting this place. Turns out she was gutting it from the inside. Control disguised as order, I said. The oldest trick. That weekend, the entire neighborhood came together for a block party. Not one of those HOA-mandated 4th of July things with lukewarm lemonade and forced smiles. This one was pure grassroots. Someone set up a grill at the cul-de-sac. Kids rode bikes without being told to slow down. People who hadn't spoken in years stood shoulder to shoulder, laughing. Jordan brought his old speakers and played soul records from the tailgate of his truck. I tossed a football with Noah while Carla handed out brownies wrapped in foil. At one point, Dana walked over holding a clipboard. You know, she said, there are state grants for community redevelopment. We could apply. Use the funds for a park upgrade, maybe fix up the sidewalks. I nodded. Let's do it. Let's make this place better than it ever was. She smiled. Funny how the worst people can bring out the best in everyone else. Later that evening, after the sun dipped below the tree line, I stood at the edge of my yard and looked at the new fence. It wasn't just about safety anymore. It was a symbol of everything we'd held together, of what we refused to let fall apart. No one ever expected a crowbar to start a revolution, but sometimes it's the cracks that let the light in. The summer sun baked the sidewalks, and the cicadas buzzed like static in the trees, but Oak Ridge wasn't the same neighborhood it had been just a few months ago. The community was rebuilding not just fences and flower beds, but trust. Still, there was one last piece of unfinished business that no one had dared to say out loud until that morning. Benji called me early, voice low and tense. They found something else, he said. I met him at the HOA's temporary office, a small rented room in the back of the town library, since the clubhouse was under audit. Dana was already there, flipping through a thick ledger with a fluorescent sticky note sticking out of the top. This isn't just embezzlement, she said, not looking away from the page. It's property fraud. She handed me a printed document and an signed deed transfer dated 4 months ago, listing Barbara as the acting party for the HOA, transferring an empty Lot 2 streets over to a company called Silver Crown Holdings. I don't recognize that name, I said. You shouldn't, Dana replied. It's a shell, registered under a Delaware address, with no visible phone number or personnel. But the bank records show wire transfers from the HOA into that company's account, and Barbara listed herself as the agent on the transfer form. Benji leaned forward. That lot was supposed to be the future site of a community playground. It was bought with Capital Reserve funds 6 years ago. And now it's gone, Dana added. Deeded away without a vote, public notice, or even a real meeting. I felt a slow burn rise in my chest. This wasn't just shady bookkeeping. She sold public land. To herself. Dana nodded. We've already submitted this to the DA. They're looping in the state attorney general. Later that afternoon, I attended a closed-door meeting with the county prosecutor and an investigator from the state's real estate fraud division. The mood was clinical, but beneath it, there was a tightly coiled energy. The kind that only builds when people realize they're standing on top of a bomb. This isn't just a violation of neighborhood trust, the prosecutor said. This is criminal conversion of public property. If the evidence holds, she'll be facing felony charges. They showed me a series of wire transfers, some routed through a local community bank, others through accounts registered under different names but tied to Barbara's tax ID. Over $60,000 had vanished into those accounts, disguised as land stewardship disbursements. This isn't just Barbara, the investigator said. We believe others may have helped coordinate this, possibly even someone from the title company. The following week, a grand jury was convened. Subpoenas were issued. And just like that, the silence around the neighborhood shattered. One by one, residents were called in to testify, not just about fines or fences, but about emails they'd received, forms they'd signed under pressure, and conversations they'd had with Barbara behind closed doors. A pattern emerged: false threats of foreclosure, inflated legal fees tacked onto late dues, and in one case, a forced lien placed on a home after the owner tried to run for the board. Her operation had been larger than anyone guessed. Then came the day the indictments dropped. Barbara was hit with 6 felony counts: real estate fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, criminal misappropriation of public assets, falsification of legal documents, and endangering a minor because the incident with the pool fence couldn't be swept under the rug. Not with the body cam footage and Noah's pediatrician detailing the psychological toll it had taken on him. Rick and Darlene faced 4 counts each, primarily for their roles in administering the fraudulent transfers and knowingly approving unvetted expenditures. The title agent who notarized the land deed? He was arrested too, caught accepting a bribe in exchange for faking the HOA board's unanimous consent. The trial took place 3 months later in the county courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Rows of Oak Ridge residents filled the benches. Some brought binders. Others brought their kids. Everyone had something at stake. Barbara walked in wearing a navy suit 2 sizes too tight, her once perfect curls flat and lifeless. She didn't look powerful anymore. She looked like someone trying to remember which lie she'd told to which person. The prosecution opened with the footage of her tearing down my fence. They didn't need to embellish. The metal crashing, the crowbar swinging, my voice shouting from the patio, it all played on the overhead screen like a bad security training video. Then came the documents. Dana had cataloged everything. The unauthorized deed, the altered meeting minutes, the ghost invoices. When she took the stand, she didn't flinch once under cross-examination. "Did you personally verify the bank accounts listed on the transfer?" the defense attorney asked. "I did," Dana replied. 3 of them traced back to Ms. Simmons. 1 was in her mother's name. The other 2 were opened by shell corporations she created 2 years ago. And the funds, withdrawn within 24 hours of each deposit, usually in cashier's checks or wire transfers to out-of-state accounts. Barbara sat motionless, lips pressed so tightly together they turned white. The final blow came from a surprise witness, one of the former HOA secretaries, who admitted on the stand that Barbara had forced her to sign blank checks and shred meeting records. "She told me it was protocol," the woman said. "Said if I didn't help, I'd be fined into foreclosure like the others." The courtroom fell silent. It took the jury less than 2 hours. Barbara was sentenced to 12 years in a state correctional facility, with no parole for at least 8. Restitution was ordered. Every dollar she'd stolen, every property she'd transferred, every false fine she'd issued had to be repaid with interest. Her assets were frozen. Her home was seized to fund the restitution fund for affected families. Rick and Darlene received 5 years each, with additional penalties barring them from serving on any corporate or residential board for life. The notary pled out and surrendered his license permanently. But the most powerful moment came at the end of sentencing, when the judge looked directly at Barbara and said, "You used a position of trust to prey on your own neighbors. You turned a community into a personal piggy bank, and you did so without remorse. Justice is not only appropriate, it's overdue." After the trial, Oak Ridge changed its charter. No board could ever again approve land use, fines, or financial transfers without a recorded vote and open meeting. Every decision had to be reviewed by a rotating oversight committee of randomly selected residents. Benji stepped down after the reforms were finalized. "I didn't run for power," he told me, "just to clean up the mess. Now it's your turn." I declined the nomination. Instead, I helped form a community council. No titles, no secret meetings, just a group of homeowners dedicated to making sure what happened never happened again. The lot Barbara tried to steal? It was finally developed into a park complete with a shaded playground, a community garden, and a little bronze plaque near the entrance. It didn't name her. It didn't need to. It just read, "Never again. For the strength of the many, not the greed of the few." Noah helped plant the first tree, a red maple, just like the ones that lined the street when we moved in. And for the first time in a long while, Oak Ridge felt like home again.